Respected guests of honor, honorable diplomats, esteemed politicians, academicians, renowned journalists, civil society representatives, business leaders, and respected guests. A very good morning to you all. I feel privileged to welcome you all to our today's event named Meet the Ambassador. The event is being organized by Center for Governance Studies in collaboration with the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, Bangladesh. This is the first event of the Meet the Ambassador series. I am Mahbubur Rahman, your host for today's event. We have with us today the guest of honor of the event, His Excellency Charles Whiteley, Ambassador and Head of Delegation, European Union Delegation to Bangladesh. The European Union and Bangladesh established diplomatic relations back in 1973, which is so far one of the most significant diplomatic relations for Bangladesh. The European Union is the largest export destination for Bangladesh. The main areas where the EU contributes in Bangladesh are economic development, human rights, good governance, and environment. Under its multi-annual indicative program for Bangladesh from 2014 to 2020, the EU committed an aid of up to 690 million euro. We hope to have some insightful discussion on the relation between Bangladesh and the European Union with our Honorable Ambassador today. There will also be a floor for question and answer afterwards. To honor and celebrate the bond that European Union and Bangladesh now share in the economy, diplomacy, and development, we thank everyone who has uplifted the spirits of today's event by joining with us today. Our event is also being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube, and the updates are also being tweeted. So we thank our online audience too who are with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I think we can go for the opening remarks now. Firstly, I would like to welcome Dr. Monjur A. Choudhury sir, Chairman, Center for Governance Studies, and also the Chairman of River Conservation Commission of Bangladesh, to share his thoughts with us, sir.
Thank you, Mahabub. His Excellency, Mr. Charles Whiteley, Ambassador and Head of Delegation of European Union to Bangladesh, Mr. Sadhan Kumar Das from FES, Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of Center for Governance Studies, I welcome you all to this meeting. Recently, FES and CGS initiated a program named Meet the Ambassadors. The objective of the program is to exchange ideas amongst the people. It is a people-to-people diplomacy, you may call it. And this is the first one of these series of meetings. And I'm glad that we have invited His Excellency Mr. Charles Whiteley. If European Union were a state, it would have been a super state. And we have a lot to learn from European Union. It represents about 500 million people. Its economy is a tremendous $17 trillion, and it represents about 18% of the global nominal GDP. Such a huge thing in the global arena. And we are fortunate that we have a vibrant relationship with European Union. And at the same time, we have a lot to learn from the European Union. There are 26 states. There are 27. After Brexit is 26. All these states have long history. And some part of this history is animosity, war. But think about it. How they are managing their economic affairs, political affairs, and other affairs amicably without much discord. So this is a model. This model that in the city of Maastricht, it was initiated. And we appreciate that. And also, today, Bangladesh is a textile powerhouse. And much of this thanks to the European Union's that quota-free, duty-free EVA program, everything but the arms. 60% of our export destination is European Union countries. We are grateful to them that they have given us this opportunity to, to flourish our textile sectors and other sectors also. However, in many areas, we have a common concern, the concern about the climate change. You may call it a climate catastrophe, impending climate catastrophe. We have common concern about the governance, about food security, and other issues. And European Union and Bangladesh is working diligently, continuously to address these issues. As you mentioned that, I also happen to be chairman of National River Conservation Commission. So I will touch few points here that Bangladesh has chalked out a 100-year program, water management, river management program. We call it Delta 2100. It's a big endeavor, and one of the EU countries, the Netherlands, they are helping us. They are helping us. They are helping us to manage these rivers, ecological restoration of these rivers, and we'll be working closely with those organizations in Netherlands and other countries in European Union. So I'll not go much into it. I would like to thank you all to attend this meeting, and we look forward to hear from His Excellency Ambassador Charles Whitley. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your thoughtful speech. Now, I would like to welcome on the podium Program Coordinator of Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, Bangladesh, Mr. Sadhan Kumar Das, to share his thoughts.
Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning and warm welcome. Today we have gathered here to meet His Excellency Charles Whitley, Ambassador and Head of Delegation of the European Union to Bangladesh. This is the first event of the joint collaboration of the Center for Governance Studies and EFES Bangladesh. We will also invite some more ambassadors from different countries in the upcoming months. Our resident representative, Mr. Felix Kolbitz, has apologized for not being here for an unavoidable circumstances. Therefore, he has assigned me to represent EFES Bangladesh. I am conveying his utmost gratitude to His Excellency Ambassador and all other guests and speakers. You may know that EFES Bangladesh has launched its geopolitics and geoeconomics theme of work in this year. Our first event was to celebrate 50th anniversary of Bangladesh-German diplomatic relations. At that event, we also found Honorable Ambassador, Mr. Whitley, and many of you. We have started this conversation in the wake of growing importance of Asia in the changing geopolitics sphere of the world. Being a member of the Indo-Pacific region, Bangladesh has geopolitical significance, particularly given its closeness to China and placement inside India's geostrategic border. The terrain of Bangladesh is a critical component in its geopolitical role. At the same time, Bangladesh-EU has a long and tested relationship. Trade, business are in the center of such bilateral relationship. But now, these two actors are exploring new horizons of relationship that includes education, quality of life, climate change, environment, and many other new areas. Through this conversation with Mr. Whitley, we hope we all hear more about the prospects and challenges of the bilateral relationship in the wider spectrum of geopolitics and geoeconomics. We are indebted to all of you for your presence and active participation. And we are very much looking forward to hearing an interactive and engaging discussion on the contents of geostrategies, where Bangladesh is an important player in the regional geopolitics and future ties of FES, of Bangladesh and EU. Stay well and have a wonderful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your valuable insight. Now, I would like to welcome on the stage His Excellency Charles Whiteley and the Executive Director of Center for Governance Studies, Jilur Rahman, to take their seat. Now, I would like to request Mr. Jilur Rahman to take the role of moderating the upcoming sessions and accompany Mr. Ambassador on the stage. Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, good morning and namaskar. Today we are discussing the European Union's geopolitical strategy worldwide, particularly in the Asia region. When it comes to Bangladesh, joining us today is Charles Whiteley, Ambassador and head of delegation of the European Union to Bangladesh. The ambassador has studied law at Downing College, Cambridge, and qualified as a barrister in the United Kingdom. And he began working for the European Union in 1999. As an EU official, he has covered human rights and democratization issues and has been posted to the European Union missions in Bangladesh and Indonesia in different times, where he has dealt with political, human rights, and trade relations issues. Ambassador, welcome to the program. Now, I would like to request Ambassador Charles Whiteley to take the control of podium and deliver his introductory speech, please.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted to be here and honoured to be here as the first session of the Meet the Ambassador series that I've heard a lot about. Thank you to FES and to the Centre for Governance Studies for this opportunity. And thank you to you for coming at a slightly ungodly hour on a Saturday morning. But it's nice to see you all and see such a varied crowd. I'm afraid I'm going to indulge myself a little bit with this address, because I know we'll have a discussion on wider geopolitical issues and on EU-Bangladesh relations. So I wanted to do a little bit of propaganda on behalf of the European Union. The European Union as an entity and as a global entity. Thank you, sir, for your introduction. I think it was a very good scene setter, saying the EU is not a superstate. So what is the EU? The EU is a very strange creature, I think, in international terms. It's not a federal entity. It's not a superstate. It's a kind of hybrid animal. Supranational is one word that's used to describe it, and it certainly has supranational characteristics. But I also wanted to pose a question, and that is, what kind of animal is the EU on the world stage? Is it a ruthless wolf with a killer instinct, or is it a reliable and gentle sheep that helps others and is basically a philanthropic and gentle organization? Or perhaps a bit of both? So those sorts of parameters are what I wanted to keep in mind in the issues that I'll address in this introductory statement. But as you may know, the EU is a complicated animal. I printed off this, which, if I know some colleagues here have served in Brussels, but this shows the process for adopting legislation in the European Union. As you see, it's not a very simple diagram. It took me a long time to master it, with lots of side arrows and different processes. But why is it complicated? And is it unnecessarily complicated is an important question. And of course, when you have 27, as you said, it used to be 28 with the United Kingdom, 27 EU member states with big differences in background, cultural traditions, legal traditions, it's important to stitch that together in a convincing way as the European Union. And as you'll know, we have several centralized institutions that attempt to stitch the fabric of the European Union together. We have the European Council, which is the heads of state and government. We have the Commission, which is the executive stroke legislative stroke civil service of the European Union. We have the European Court of Justice, which makes sure that all the laws are applied fairly across the 27 member states. And we have the European Parliament. And as you may know, tomorrow we have a delegation of 6 European parliamentarians arriving in Bangladesh. They're from the International Trade Committee, and they're here to meet government and to meet civil society, trade unions, ILO and UN partners to discuss various aspects of the trade relations with Bangladesh. But what I would say is that constructive cooperation is at the heart of the European Union's DNA. As I said, we have 27 member states, and sometimes it's difficult to keep them all on the same page, of course. That's partly remedied by having the possibility of qualified majority voting, so we don't always need consensus on every decision, but still the instinct is to work for consensus, because I think member states, as sovereign nations, are only comfortable if they're all speaking on the same agreed position. In the European Parliament, that's of course a political animal, we have 705 members of the European Parliament in 8 different groups, and the European Parliament has increasing political power. When it began its life, in the early days, it wasn't elected, it was appointed, but from 1979 onwards, it became directly elected by the citizens of the EU, or European Economic Community as it was then called. And it has power to adopt and approve legislation, to propose legislation, and to sack the European Commission. So ultimately, if the European Commission, with the commissioners appointed to it at political level, misbehave, they can be dismissed by the European Parliament. That's never happened, but it kind of happened in 1999 when the Santer Commission stepped down and resigned before the Parliament forced its resignation. But the Parliament is a very interesting animal. I think, now we have the rise of a certain degree of populism in Europe, so you see more extreme parties having a seat in the European Parliament and making their views heard, and that can complicate things. It can also mean more virulent debates on issues, but that's the nature of Europe, and the cross-section of political parties now is probably more than it's ever been across the whole of Europe. Having said that, it's important to bear in mind what's often referred to as the democratic deficit in the European Union. Why is that still an issue? Well, at the last elections for the European Parliament, turnout was 50%. I think in Bangladesh, if you had turnout of 50% for an election, you'd be pretty disturbed. And 50% was actually a recent high. Before that, it was in the 40s for previous elections. I think that the highest was 20 years ago, perhaps, turnout. But that shows that there's work to be done to enthuse the European electorate to vote in these elections. I would also say, because I think a bit of critical self-criticism is not unhelpful, and we all need to do that, but the EU has had a complicated history. As you know, it dates back to 1957, the genesis of the EU, with 6 founding member states, and has had many crises along the way. We've had the Balkan Wars. I think we forget now with the war in Ukraine that it's not so long ago that we had a very bitter civil war in Europe, where the EU was faced with many difficulties in responding effectively. We've also had the financial crisis. We've had the teething troubles of the euro, and the euro has been a great success. It's now the 2nd largest reserve currency in the world. It's adopted by 19 EU member states. But of course, it has its complications. It's 19 member states with different financial and fiscal needs. But the process is undeniable, the process towards economic integration and fiscal integration. You mentioned the departure of the UK. That was another big challenge along the way for the EU, and a bitter blow, I think, to see a large member state leaving. And now, as I said, on the European continent, we have war again with Ukraine, something we never thought we'd see again, a state invading another sovereign state in Europe, 5 million refugees on the run, being sheltered in other EU member states, no sign of the war ending, and all the ramifications that that has for the globe, including Bangladesh in terms of food security and other issues. But to take a bird's eye view of the basic 2 processes that have driven the EU in the last decades, one is broadening and one is deepening. And we speak of broadening meaning the increasing number of member states, UK aside. So as you'll know, in 2004, there was a big bang enlargement of the European Union with 10 new member states joining, years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And now we have 7 recognized candidates for membership. And those 7 candidates for membership are Turkey, which applied in 1987. I think that relationship is at a particular juncture. Things have changed a lot. And whether it's realistic that Turkey will join in the foreseeable future is, of course, a big question, and one that's debated still hotly. But it is still a candidate for membership. North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Serbia, and as of 2022, Ukraine and Moldova are now official candidates for joining. But it's not easy to join the European Union, and that's why the leaders of the EU couldn't wave a magic wand and say Ukraine can become a member overnight. You have to meet very stringent economic conditions, market economy. You have to have a functioning market economy. that can compete in a European context, and you have to have a functioning democracy with all the checks and balances that that entails. But the promise is there that these 7 states can join when they're ready to join. And I think perhaps as an aside, all new member states that join the European Union have to agree to join the euro when the economic conditions are right. There isn't a political choice. And that wasn't the case for countries such as the UK, Denmark and others. They negotiated an opt-out to decide if and when they would like to join. That's no longer the case. If you join or rejoin, should that ever happen, you have to accept that you will join the euro. The other one of the 2 big processes is deepening. Deepening meaning closer and closer integration, so closer economic, political, foreign policy and security ties. And we see that happening quite quickly now, spurred on also by the Ukrainian crisis. As you know, the EU was created officially in 1993, taking over from the EC and before that the EEC, pursuant to the Maastricht Treaty. Now it speaks with one voice on many issues on the global stage. So trade is one. I think we already mentioned this morning GSP+. The EU is a tough trade negotiator, and if we look at that sheep-wolf comparison, there's a bit of wolfishness and a bit of sheepishness in the EU. The wolfishness is that the EU does defend its own interests when negotiating trade agreements, of course, like we all do. The sheepishness, if you like, the more gentle, understanding approach is what we do with least developed countries and other developing countries through our GSP and everything but arms, the duty-free and quota-free access that states enjoy to the EU market. And that perhaps will come on later in more detail to GSP Plus in the context of Bangladesh. But at present, there are 8 beneficiary countries for GSP Plus that Bangladesh is moving towards joining. Those countries are Pakistan, Bolivia, Capo Verde, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, Philippines, Sri Lanka, and I believe Uzbekistan as well. So there aren't so many countries in that scheme, far fewer than we have in the everything but arms duty-free, quota-free access scheme. And of course, there are more stringent conditions attached to the GSP+. On security, I think the EU is definitely becoming more of a wolf. Traditionally, some of our member states, a lot of them are in NATO. Several have a tradition of neutrality and aren't in NATO. But as you'll have seen, the Ukraine crisis has pushed Finland and Sweden now to apply for NATO membership, which says an awful lot given their traditions of neutrality on the European continent. And in an unprecedented and unanimous reaction to the Ukraine crisis and the invasion by Russia, the EU decided to provide $500 million and then a further euro from the European Peace Facility to fund and coordinate EU military assistance and to deliver military equipment, including lethal equipment, to Ukraine. And that's a huge quantum leap for the European Union. There's no tradition of being a security provider with hard weaponry, and this is what's happening now in Europe because of the crisis on Ukraine. Having said that, we do have a very strong tradition, like Bangladesh, of peacekeeping or crisis operations. And at the moment, we have 18 missions around the world, crisis missions, 11 of which are civilian, so maybe police or other civilian actors, and 7 are military. So 7 basically EU military missions in Libya, Mali, the Mediterranean, Central African Republic, and elsewhere. And our leaders have just decided to adopt what's called a strategic compass, which envisages a much stronger autonomous role for the EU in the military and security sphere, including the capability of rapid deployment of up to 5,000 troops for different types of crises, including cyber defense policy, maritime security policy, and other areas where defense cooperation will now become the norm amongst EU member states. None of which puts to one side the relationship with NATO. We, as EU, fully recognize that NATO is the security guarantor for Europe as a defensive alliance, and I think that's an important point given how many times people raise the issue of NATO in the context of Ukraine, as if NATO was a military alliance that was bent on occupying non-NATO members. That's clearly not the case. Article 5, the whole of the NATO is premised on collective defense. But to come to a close in what I wanted to cover in this part of the program, I wanted to talk a bit more about the sheepish character of the European Union. In other words, the soft power that it tries to deploy around the world, whether that be people-to-people links or other support. And the EU and its member states are still the largest providers of development and humanitarian assistance around the world. So the Team Europe, as we call it, provided 75 billion euros of official development assistance in 2019, making, as I say, us the largest provider of such assistance globally. We're a strong advocate for multilateral solutions and the international rule of law, as well as the UN Charter, like Bangladesh. I was in New York for 4 years, heading our team on human rights in the Third Committee of the General Assembly. We worked very closely with Bangladesh on Bangladesh's resolution on a culture of peace, which very much emphasized international rule of law and the UN Charter. And that's an area where we definitely see eye to eye with Bangladesh. Climate change, of course. The EU is one of the biggest pledges of climate change assistance, 100 billion euros, and we are meeting that pledge. We have some other partners, not to name names, but from the developed world, who make pledges or don't make pledges and don't fulfill those pledges. But I think the EU can be quite proud that we've made a pledge and we're sticking to it. And we're also supporting adaptation and other adjustments around the world. I mean, I just read that the UK might have temperatures of 40 degrees centigrade for the first time next week, which is quite frightening. I think we're all seeing weather pattern changes also here in Bangladesh, but that's something the EU is very committed to working on, particularly also with Bangladesh as a leading voice, not only through the Climate Vulnerable Forum, but through other instances. We look to Bangladesh for its leadership internationally on this issue. Then we're also developing our Global Gateway initiative, which is about infrastructure and people-to-people connectivity. People ask, is this a rival to the Belt and Road, China's Belt and Road initiative? We don't see it as a rival, we see it as a different creature, because it's not about, from our point of view, it's not about encouraging indebtedness, it's about working together with partners. And we'll be mobilizing 300 billion euro for infrastructure projects around the world, including here in Bangladesh. We have the European Investment Bank coming this month to talk about support to the green transition and renewable energy, where we have a mixture of loans and grants that we can offer as a partner of Bangladesh to support what Bangladesh wants to support as a priority in the renewable energy field. We also promote human rights and democracy at home and abroad, and that's important to speak of at home because, of course, we have human rights violations in Europe. Everywhere has human rights violations, but what we've built in the EU context is institutions to monitor and redress those violations. So we have the European Court of Justice, which has a long track record of addressing human rights issues, including the rights of women. Fair pay for women was one of the earliest judgments of the European Court of Justice. We have the Fundamental Rights Agency in Vienna that monitors the human rights situation in all 27 EU member states, including on issues like Islamophobia, where in recent years the EU has definitely faced really acute challenges. Anti-Semitism, also another issue that's been very acute. The treatment of refugees, another area that's been very challenging. And then at an even bigger level, the European Court of Human Rights, which is not an EU institution, but all EU member states are members of the European Court of Human Rights. Russia is a member of the European Court of Human Rights as a member of the Council of Europe. So sometimes even we get mixed up about the dividing lines between all these pan-European institutions. But that is a non-EU institution that is very vigilant and has a court, of course, to address human rights violations if they're not addressed adequately at home. Just finally, the EU has a global footprint. We have a diplomatic mission here with 65 people, but we have 140 diplomatic missions around the world. And I think we're trying to expand that footprint in Asia. We're beefing up our resources in Asia. We have a new Indo-Pacific strategy, which we've discussed at great length also with Bangladesh as a key partner. And I'm very pleased that it was mentioned that next year it's 50 years of our relationship. We're a little bit behind some of the states who've already celebrated the 50 years, but I think that means we'll have the occasion to have a big event next year to really hone in on our relations, and which are expanding: trade, economic, people-to-people, climate change, maritime engagement. All these make for a lot of energy in the EU-Bangladesh relationship, and I think we'll be talking about that in the next segment. So thank you very much for listening. And I just wanted to say, because you mentioned textiles, and the EU is the largest destination still for Bangladesh RMG. And I've said it every time this is mentioned. You know, thanks is expressed to the European Union for giving duty-free, quota-free access to Bangladesh goods. Our thanks to Bangladesh because we get high-quality, good-value garments, which benefits our consumers. So I think the thanks, it's a two-way street, and I think we shouldn't ever forget to make that point. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much for your patience. And you can decide for yourself if the EU is a wolf or a sheep.
Ambassador, thanks for your fascinating speech. Charles, let me start with this. Where do you see Bangladesh-EU relations in the next 10 years? And what are the plans of the European Union regarding Bangladesh in the upcoming days, especially regarding trade and development?
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Zilla. Thanks a lot. I mean, the next 10 years is going to be a very interesting period for Bangladesh-EU relations. I mean, principally because of the transition of Bangladesh that Bangladesh is now making from LDC to developing country status, and that has all sorts of implications, as you know, for our relationship, including the transition from everything but arms to GSP+. And that's already well underway. I think the government has established different committees to plan for that, and we're part of that process as an international partner of Bangladesh. But also the next 10 years, that's on the trade front especially. The next 10 years, I think we're really looking at how we develop the political engagement with Bangladesh, because as you know, we are launching a political dialogue for the first time. That was supposed to happen in June, end of June, where our Deputy Secretary, June 28th, our Deputy Secretary General was going to come to engage with the Honourable State Minister for Foreign Affairs, Sharia Alam, and that had to be postponed because of an urgent negotiation in Iran on the Iran nuclear deal. As you know, the EU is one of the lead negotiators with the US and others on that deal, and it's a very critical moment. So we hope to arrange that meeting as soon as possible, because on the agenda for that meeting is a whole gamut of issues, from security cooperation to maritime issues, connectivity, energy, climate change, the sort of things that we need to work much closer together on because of the global situation, you know. So I think we're looking forward to the next 10 years. We're looking forward to celebrating 50 years of the relationship. And certainly we are investing in this relationship, and Bangladesh is investing in our relationship. And I hope that the trade relationship and the investment relationship can grow very significantly in the coming 10 years, because what we see is underperforming investment. You know, the EU is the largest investing partner of Bangladesh, over 2 billion euros. But as I've said several times before, with Vietnam we have over 6 billion, and it's a far smaller country. So I want that figure to increase by working with Bangladesh to boost investment, working with EU member states and others, and I think that's perfectly possible in the coming years.
Ambassador, as we all know, the export market of Bangladesh is dependent on the RMG sector. Do you think Bangladesh should explore other options and bring diversity to the trade? What would be your suggestion to attract foreign investors if we explore other options?
I think that's happening. I remember when I was first posted in Bangladesh in 2005 to 9, we were funding trade-related programs as EU to support the diversification of the export basket. I don't think you can force it. It has to come from entrepreneurs and business in Bangladesh. There has to be a clear business case for new sectors. But I think there's a lot of energy behind new sectors, and you only have to look around Dhaka to see the number of startups in different areas. There's potential in the service field, I think, which is not yet tapped. ICT. I think there's new sort of niche markets like bicycles where Bangladesh is doing very well. And I think we would certainly encourage Bangladesh to look at where new sectors might come through. We're supporting a program with the OECD that is in partnership with the Ministry of Commerce, where OECD is looking at peer review processes to see how, for example, did Vietnam or Indonesia bring through different export sectors. And so I think it will happen organically. I think still RMG accounts for over 80% of Bangladesh's exports. And the RMG success story has to continue. I think it will continue, and it will maybe evolve into higher level products and more high tech. And we all know Bangladesh's excellent track record on green factories. That's a real selling point, I think, for the European market, certainly. So all of these are strengths that I'm sure Bangladesh will preserve, but equally, I'm sure Bangladesh business is very carefully looking at the future GSP regime and how they may take advantage of that and where the lucrative markets may lie. So I don't think foreigners can come along with sackfuls of advice. I think it will, there is expertise out there in the OECD and elsewhere, and I think it will happen organically.
Let's move to another issue. But, Bangladesh hosts some 1 million Rohingya refugees, most of whom fled for their lives from Myanmar in 2017, while others arrived many years earlier. Do you think the repatriation of the Rohingya is possible in the near future? And do you think the international community can play a role in pursuing the Myanmar government and holding them accountable for their genocidal actions?
I mean, I think first of all, everybody's agreed it should happen as soon as possible, and we all support the Bangladesh government in trying to facilitate that. Everybody's agreed it should happen in a voluntary and safe way. So clearly, the situation in Myanmar is very troubling. The regime there continues to perpetrate human rights abuses. You mentioned accountability. There has not yet been accountability for the crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated against the Rohingya and others. I think we all know there are processes at the international level through the ICJ and the ICC, and the EU is very much supportive of trying to bring people to account for international crimes. But in the meantime, we have to support Bangladesh, which after all has hosted 1 million refugees for nearly 5 years now. This is a huge undertaking for any country. We in Europe know what refugee crises look like. We had, the Mediterranean crisis not so long ago. We continue to have the Ukraine refugee crisis with 5 million refugees now in our member states around Ukraine. So I think we very much understand what Bangladesh is going through, but of course Bangladesh is an LDC and it's very expensive to host refugees. I think we would commend what Bangladesh has done to build facilities on Basan Char. I visited Basan Char with other ambassadors and seen the facilities firsthand. The great attempt to make these facilities safe and as good as possible with livelihood opportunities and education. So we want to be here to support Bangladesh, but we also know that funds are dwindling for humanitarian crises. There's so many competing crises in the world that funds are getting squeezed, and that means we have to try harder and harder to bring more support to Bangladesh, but there's less money in the pot. So I think the point you make about voluntary return, we have to keep pushing Myanmar in the UN. I ran the resolution on the Rohingya in New York for 4 years with Bangladesh, well for 3 years with Bangladesh, and that was a hard job, trying to persuade other countries like China and even OIC countries who are Muslim majority countries like Bangladesh to support this initiative in the right way. But we did work hard with Bangladesh and we did get those resolutions adopted. The EU has sanctions on Myanmar, we have arms embargo, we have suspension of development assistance, we're supporting ASEAN efforts to broker some kind of solution to the current problems. When people say you should do more, and you didn't say that, but when people do say you should do more, I'm at a loss to think what else we can do. I mean, do people want us to declare war or, so we're doing what we can. But there are other big players in the region, and then no naming names, but it's not hard to guess, who could do more.
But everybody knows.
Yeah, could do more. Have a lot of influence on the regime, and should be exerting that influence to the maximum to make sure the Rohingya can go home as soon as possible.
Charles, as you mentioned, the war in Ukraine has been going on for months. Despite tough sanctions from the European Union and Western allies on Russia, the developing and least developed countries are also experiencing the brunt of war. What have been the broader effects of the war on the EU? Do you think there is a diplomatic solution to ending the war?
I think we have to hope and pray there's a diplomatic solution, and hope and pray there's a solution for the sake of the Ukrainian people who are dying in their thousands, or being murdered in their thousands. Hope and pray that there's a solution given the fact there are 5 million refugees, as I mentioned, who are stranded away from their homes, so many children who are forced out of their homes. And I think efforts are underway. We've seen the positive momentum now between releasing the grain. And Turkey and others have been playing a role in trying to secure that, because 10 million tons of grain, as we know, are trapped in Ukraine. Half of Ukraine's grain, half of the World Food Programme's grain to go to Africa and the most hungry places in the world comes from Ukraine. So the longer that grain is blocked, the more hardship and possible starvation it will cause. But you spoke about the effects on the EU, and I touched on it in the opening speech. I think it's really amplified the resolve of the European Union to act with one voice and to act convincingly with one voice. We've had 6 rounds of sanctions. Now, I think it's very open to debate in general about the merits of sanctions. Are sanctions a good thing or a bad thing? Will they work in the context of Russia? The point is they make a very strong political statement, and they do target the machinery of war. So the sanctions aren't just there as a political nicety, they're there to target what is feeding the Russian war machine, and to try to encourage a change of heart that will stop the bloodshed and stop the human suffering. So I think, as I mentioned, it's also strengthened the resolve for security matters, because Europe is, in the end, quite a small place, with many national borders. It's a patchwork of nation states, and we don't want a wider war in Europe. Heaven forbid we see a wider war again on the European continent, because we all know European wars tend to morph into even bigger conflicts if we look at history. So I think we should all be frightened, we should all be hopeful and praying that a diplomatic solution is found before this escalates.
Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, we are seeing a dormant NATO waking from its slumber. What is the current perception of the EU regarding the rising NATO militarization?
The rising
NATO militarization.
NATO militarization. NATO militarization. I mean, it's not happening for no reason. Where if you perceive a threat, you have to protect your own citizens against a threat. And if you ask me, I mentioned Sweden and Finland joining NATO. If there's one thing you don't associate with Sweden and Finland, it's militarism or aggression. These are peaceful Nordic countries who regularly come top of all global surveys for quality of life, citizens' welfare, peacefulness. But they're joining NATO for a reason, and I'm sure it took a lot of heart searching for them to take that decision, because clearly they feel they now need to be within this defensive alliance. And let's not forget that NATO is a defensive alliance. Historically, it's there to make sure, when we had the old face-off between the US and the Soviet Union, it was the guarantor and still is the guarantor of safety in Europe. So I wouldn't use the term militarization, I would use the term an enhanced awareness of the need to defend oneself.
There is a perspective that the EU nations are caught in the power struggle between the US and China. Western pundits espouse that China has a game plan, and they intend to win over the EU in their struggle to establish a post-US world hegemony. Do you agree with this paradigm?
I think first of all we have to agree that it's perfectly legitimate for China to rise as a world power, and there's no monopoly on that. And we have quite elaborate relations with China. China is a strategic partner of the European Union. People forget that. We have 10 strategic partners in the world, and China is a strategic partner. For the last 3 years, we've also called China a systemic rival. So you may think those two things are incompatible, but I think they reflect the complexity of the relationship with China. I think what we want to see, and what we've articulated in our Indo-Pacific strategy, is the Indo-Pacific region not falling prey to being closed off. We want freedom of navigation. A lot of our global investment goes through the South China Sea and through the Indo-Pacific region. And we want freedom of navigation. And I think everybody who believes in the rule of law and the international rule of law believes in that. We remain a partner of China. China is a big player in the world. And obviously there are differences in our global viewpoints, quite strong differences. But again, the main thing is that we talk and have dialogue and discuss, and it doesn't turn into something less palatable. I think that talking and diplomatic effort and strategic engagement is critical for all of us. And I think Bangladesh has a key role to play in this region. As a stable power in the middle of a very difficult region, that stability is highly valued, I think. So.
Thank you. Charles, you stressed the need for human rights principles when it comes to foreign investment and international trade. However, the war in Ukraine has divided lines quite sharply between the East and the West when it comes to geopolitical interests. We have seen China, India, and Bangladesh all take a far different tone regarding the war compared to the EU. How have India, China, and Bangladesh stance on the war affected the EU's strategic relations with these nations?
I mean, first of all, I would say it's every state's right to decide how they approach a given problem. So we're not here to lecture or anybody about how you determine your foreign policy. I think Bangladesh has made very welcome statements about the international rule of law and the UN Charter. Bangladesh supported the humanitarian resolution in the UN, which sent a very strong signal, because at the end of the day, this is about the suffering of people. And the support that we got for this resolution on humanitarian affairs sent a strong signal that we need to address this and make sure people don't suffer. So I think we're engaging with China, India and others on this very difficult issue. I think nobody wants this war to continue. Whatever the state of relations each state has with Russia, nobody wants this to carry on. They want peace because it has global ramifications, whether that be food and fuel prices, transport disruption, or other issues. I think the key thing, as I said before, is that we all talk, because without talk, it can only go in the wrong direction. And we are talking to all our partners, including China and India, on this issue.
And in this segment, my last question to you: in the 10th Joint Commission meeting in Brussels, the European Union welcomed the openness of the Bangladesh government regarding an international election observation mission for the next general elections. Will you see observers from the EU during these national elections?
I can only say I don't know. There's nothing decided, and it's still 18 months away. So we've discussed these issues with the government when we had the Joint Commission, as you said. Also in that Joint Commission, we talked about all the issues on the plate of relations, from climate change to trade and so on. But the clear answer to that is I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Now we will move to the question and answer segments. If you have any question, please raise your hand. And when you get to the microphone, please introduce yourself, and please be very brief. No comments, please. Anyone can raise your hand. Anyone can raise hands. Please.
Thank you. Honorable Ambassador and Head of Delegation, His Excellency Charles Whiteley, and thanks to Center for Governance Studies and FES. I would like to...
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. It's me, Advocate Fahima Nasrin, Assistant International Affairs Secretary for BNP. So I just would like to know, when you were talking, you have mentioned that on human rights, you have been working and you have vast experience. And the gross violation of human rights in our country, starting from enforced disappearances and political persecution, like millions of people of us, we have been suffering for the last 1 decade, and rule of law, and good governance, democracy. Do you have any specific thoughts on these 4 points on the upcoming election and for our betterment of the people? Thank you.
2 more questions.
Yeah.
And,
Yes, absolutely.
you can write it down. Parvez Prima, please introduce yourself and Parvez.
Good morning, Ambassador. I'm Parvez Abbasi, an economist by profession. So I'll do the easy part. I'll be asking you a less tougher question, and obviously a non-political question. There's just 2 sides to it. And number 1 is, we know that European Union, one of the strong tenets is focused on is human rights and democracy. But as you have rightly mentioned even in your speech, within European Union member countries, especially in Eastern Europe, we see, as you have again mentioned, rise in ethno-nationalism, or again, jingoistic nationalism, as you say. And one of the worst case offenders is Hungary, which is a member of European Union, Viktor Orban. And his re-election in April proves the point that despite increase in income, despite a substantive improvement in the standard of living in Hungary, which has been brought about by joining European Union, democracy or rule of law of judiciary has come under attack. So how does European Union propose to deal with this? That's just again 1 question out of curiosity. And number 2, and this is again as an economist, which is my concern, there has been a lot of talks about a legislation that has been proposed against fast fashion, which will be put to vote in next year. And 2 components are there is over here basically emphasis on basically goods, emphasis on textiles, which have basically uses less of water, conserves resources, basically eco-friendly, and also again emphasis on global labor rights. So, and we are also one of the components of GSP Plus for which Bangladesh is angling is also labor rights and human rights, so on and so forth. So if this legislation tentatively is passed through, will it have an adverse impact on our RMG exports, especially fast fashion products, to European Union markets? Thank you.
One more question at this moment. Yeah, please.
Good morning. This is me, Ahmed Reza. Good morning, Ambassador Whitley. I have two questions basically.
You are from which organization?
This is me, Ahmed Reza from Jamuna Television. I'm working over there. I have two questions to Ambassador. The first question is that you have mentioned, as you have mentioned, that you want to elaborate your engagement with Bangladesh in next 10 years about political issues. So just few yesterday or day before yesterday, you have mentioned your concern about the next election. Yeah, you have shown your concern about that. So still do you believe, and after that, our political leaders from government side, they have said that you don't have any rights to comments about next election. So do you have any particular concern or comment about that you can or you have views about next election? And one more question is, do you have any concern about the regional instability? As you know that it's increasing day by day. If you think about the Afghanistan and followed by Pakistan issues, and now it's Sri Lanka. So do you have any particular concern about the regional instability? Thank you so much.
Charles, please.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Madam. I mean, first of all, I wouldn't claim to have vast knowledge and experience on human rights. I have worked in the human rights field, but I've also done lots of other things, including political relations with our Secretary General. But I think we have a very broad-based relationship with Bangladesh, regardless of whatever government is in power. We've had the Joint Commission that Zillow mentioned in place since 2001, and that Joint Commission, which met in Dhaka, in Brussels a month or two ago, gives us that broad-based platform for engagement, and that includes, as I said, trade. It includes climate change. It includes GSP Plus, and it includes human rights. There's a subgroup on human rights there. So we engage through these channels, and it's right and proper that we engage that way with the government of the day, whoever's in power. And we also expect to be engaged with on our human rights records. As I mentioned, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism that's reared its head in Europe. So I think in any mature relationship, you have that dialogue. And of course, it happens with all of our relations. You know, with the US, we raise death penalty. With Japan, we raise death penalty. It's rare that you have a complete meeting of minds on human rights issues, but that gives a vehicle for discussion and engagement. And we also, of course, fund projects here in Bangladesh in the human rights domain, for example, on the rights of women. And we've been doing that for many years, and I think that's been, what I like is we often fund grassroots organizations that can make a difference at the grassroots level, so it's not all at the macro level. I think that was quite as an academic, I'm not an academic, so it was quite an interesting, I think the question is probably a lot more interesting than my answer will be. But you speak, I mean, I think it's right to acknowledge that Europe is grappling with these issues. There's no point pretending that we don't have the rise of populist parties. It's not just in Eastern European countries. You know, I'm from the Netherlands. We've had Geert Wilders and other parties who've been taken quite, by European standards, quite extreme positions. I think some people would categorize what happened in the UK as an exercise in populism, you know, what led to the departure from the European Union. So these forces are happening. I think it's important to try to understand why they're happening. I think we see a return perhaps to more mainstream politics now in many countries, where there had been this dalliance with more radical ideas. But then again, in some of our big member states in recent elections, there have been candidates who are from non-traditional mainstream parties. So the point is that there is legal accountability in the European Union. It may not happen quickly, but it's there. And you know, the European Court of Justice, if there is any breach of the treaties, there is the possibility ultimately of suspending membership of the European Union. That's absolutely the nuclear option, and is unlikely to happen if there are more than one state who are in cahoots on this. But there are other options, and you asked what is part of the response. I mean, you may have seen that the Rescue EU funds, you know, we have this massive post-COVID recovery plan, and that's very much conditionalized on improvements in some countries of rule of law, of independence of the judiciary, and so basically, to put it in a crude way, they won't get the money if there isn't some sign of improvement. But clearly, you know, if a country elects through democratic processes a leader that Brussels doesn't like, he's still democratically elected. But then you have to ask yourself, was the media free and fair? Was the courts free and fair? And that's something we grapple with in Europe. And I think that's why we ultimately have courts that will invigilate on this. We have a rights agency that will ring the alarm bell. But of course, it's not a perfect scenario. So, but thank you for raising that. And fast fashion is a very important thing, because the last thing we want is for this initiative to harm the garment industry in Bangladesh or to harm the exports of garments to the EU. I think there's enough lead time now, and we don't know what final shape this legislation will take. There's enough lead time to make sure any adjustments that need to be made can be made. And as I mentioned, as you know better than I do, Bangladesh is already doing very well in terms of green compliance, and we have a whole process in play on labour standards. So I think all of this helps and makes sure that when this legislation sees the light of day, Bangladesh will be in a strong position to not suffer from it. So, on the other question, I'm not going to have a running commentary on the next elections. I think we're here as friends and partners of Bangladesh. We meet as many people as possible to understand the situation. And I won't comment on comments about what we do. I'll just say that we are here with good intentions and to engage and discuss and understand, because as I've said before, we as foreigners, we have to understand the countries we're posted in. You know, I'm sure the Bangladesh ambassador in the US or in Brussels, I know he meets everyone and anyone to discuss European politics. He's meeting all the MEPs who are coming here on mission tomorrow. So if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be doing our job, and it's about understanding and being able to understand all the facets of the relationship. Regional instability, I think definitely it's a concern. I think what's happening in neighbouring countries of Bangladesh reinforces the point that we have to work, or Bangladesh has to be amongst those working for regional stability, and I think it's a good starting point that Bangladesh has the mantra of friendship to all, malice to none. So I think Bangladesh can make its voice heard as a force for stability in this region. And of course you have your regional organizations, SARC and BIMSTEC. They're not, I don't know how I would describe them. I'm not an expert on regional integration here, but suffice it to say that I think any steps that can support regional stability are critical. And that's why we have our Indo-Pacific strategy, because we want to work with all our partners in the region for that stability, because it's such an important region in the world as well. So, thank you.
So, microphone is yes. Shama, please. I'll come to you. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. It's Shama Ubaid. I'm representing BNP here. First of all, thank you to CGS and FES for organizing this Meet the Ambassador program. And that CGS have started this series with European Union and Ambassador Charles Whiteley shows that EU is one of the largest and biggest trade partners and a friend of Bangladesh. As you said, His Excellency, in your speech and in your answering questions, that trade, in regard to trade and in regard to other social issues, I think that Bangladesh is not only, and Bangladeshi people, EU is not only a trade partner, it goes beyond diplomacy. I think a lot of countries in EU are homes of a lot of Bangladeshis, we know. So it goes beyond diplomacy. It's a friendship that started in 1973 and continuing, and I hope that it will go stronger in the future. I have three questions, actually. One of them, my first question is that you in your speech mentioned that, okay, you want to see the number going up in regard of trade. In RMG sector, in textile, in any other sectors. So what do you think, in your opinion, what are the factors that can hamper that in Bangladesh, in the context of Bangladesh as a country? Because it is a country which went through a lot of turmoil since 1971, and we are still struggling for a lot of issues in regards to democracy and human rights and stuff like that. So, but we at the same time, as citizens of Bangladesh, we want to see the economy stronger. We want to see the trade going up with the European Union. So, in your opinion, what can hamper that? That's number one question. Number two is, recently Bangladesh government has requested the United States to lift sanction from Russia as far as the Ukraine-Russia war is concerned. And I think globally we all want the war to stop. We want peace. We want human rights to be reestablished. We want the suffering to end. But I know that it's every country's own prerogative, but if you have any opinion on that, or if EU has any a particular opinion on that. And number three is, as far as Rohingya issue goes, it's a problem that we have to live with. We know that, we understand that, and it's not going to go away. But at the same time, EU, as a strategic partner of China and India, and we know that these are the countries in this region can play a role, can help Bangladesh to actually do something about it. So if does EU have any plan to actually talk to China or have any dialogue with them or India or any other country that can help facilitate that? So that's number three question. And of course, I won't ask about election and stuff because we all are political being here. No matter what question we ask, it ends up in politics. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer the questions.
Ambassador Nasim Firdaus.
Thank you, Zillu, for organizing this event with your partners. And thank you, Ambassador Whitley, for a very good introductory speech, which sort of gave us a roundup on what European Union is doing. I have two simple questions. I hope they're simple. One is that you mentioned that the European Union is the largest market for the RMG. For the last 30 years, what we have seen is that the products that are produced here are all brand names that already exist in the European Union or elsewhere around the world. And we're just reproducing what designs and whatever the name brands are, and that is sold there. Has the European Union ever invested or even considered investing in creating Bangladeshi brands through designing their own garments according to the requirements of the European Union, and provided special assistance for creating those brands in terms of creating fashion designing schools or that kind of opportunity where perhaps more women can be employed, and there will be a better contribution from the women in designing. The second question is that one wonders why the European Union dragged its feet in response to the Ukrainian issue, because it has been boiling for the last couple of years, and at least for the last 2 years, if we recall from the Trump years. It seemed that the European Union didn't take enough action at that point in time, which led to the invasion that the Russians have done. What could have the European Union done, and why was it so slow in responding? Thank you.
Person behind Ambassador Nasim.
Thank you. I'm Rabiul Islam. I'm representing RAPID. I'm an economist by profession. My question is, Bangladesh is putting a renewed focus on increasing technical education and skill development through technical education. So I'd like to ask that what sort of technical assistance could European Union offer Bangladesh in terms of providing, increasing the technical education, because we see a lot of prospect in improving the technical education. So my question is for that. Thank you.
Ambassador.
Thank you. I think it's on. Thank you very much. I probably can't read my own writing now, but never mind. I think factors that can hamper trade. I mean, of course, the world is very unpredictable, and what I think has to be borne in mind is Bangladesh has a competitive advantage now in the European market, but that can change quite quickly if other states come through, you know, who are more competitive because they have cheaper labour costs or whatever, and then develop quickly an industry. I could see a danger emanating from that quarter. Also, red tape. I mean, we just had our Bangladesh EU business climate dialogue, where we talked about what steps do we need to take together to encourage greater investment and engagement from Europe, because even though we're the biggest destination, it shouldn't you know, make us rest on our laurels. There's lots of potential there. And then GSP Plus, of course, will be a long process. I mean, the transition period is until 2029, so the present trading regime will stay in place until then. But then you're in a different arena once you're in the GSP Plus arena. And I mentioned there are 8 states who now, you know, are engaged on GSP Plus. That entails the ratification of 32 international conventions, which Bangladesh has already done, but also implementation, and that's across the social, environmental, human rights fields. And that's a whole process, and that's quite an intense engagement. So I wouldn't term that a risk as such. It's actually an opportunity, if you turn it around, to continue getting duty-free, quota-free trade, but ensuring that these standards are met, which will also position Bangladesh and other countries well in terms of consumer interest and consumer faith. You know, if you have good green standards, good labour standards, then you won't have NGOs in Europe writing exposés about that will undermine your market. So I would answer it in that way. And then the point about lifting sanctions on Russia, as I said earlier, every state, sovereign state, has a right to decide how it approaches these issues. We've chosen to apply sanctions on Russia. The Americans have, and others have as well. States that don't often apply sanctions have joined the sanctions regime. So I think the voicing of concern about this is perfectly understandable in terms of needing to know more details about our sanctions. One point that I had 2 weeks ago was that it wasn't well understood in Bangladesh that EU sanctions do not apply to the import of foodstuffs from Russia. We do not seek to in any way hamper wheat being imported to Bangladesh under our sanctions regime. There may be reasons why it's more difficult, the banking system or the transport system, but per se we're not trying to stop that import of key foods, and that's why sometimes there's misleading information about the impact of sanctions on the food crisis. I think the biggest impact is the embargo that the Russians are now doing on 20 million tons of grain in Ukraine. And on Rohingya, yeah, we are talking to everybody. I think everybody's engaged in trying to find a solution, because everybody knows the present status quo isn't tenable. You know, we can't have 1 million refugees staying ad infinitum in Bangladesh with 1 million mouths to feed. It's clear that they have to go back when the circumstances are right for that to happen. And certainly I hope that others will work even harder to join the EU in trying to facilitate that, also in the UN context. So thank you for the questions. I really can't read my writing now. God. Oh, brand name in the EU. When I was first here, we had very elaborate trade-related technical assistance, and it was in all sorts of domains. I can't recall whether in those years it included the idea of a homegrown brand. It's possible, but I think what we learned was that foreigners can't really come along and grow something, you know, without obviously Bangladesh being in the lead. So we stopped our trade-related technical assistance and moved on to other areas, because we see that actually what's needed is for business itself to decide how to address a certain market. But I think it's a very good idea, and I've seen it in other sectors. You know, I've seen it in, for example, the perfume sector, where there are Bangladesh brands coming up, very proud to be made in Bangladesh, and I hope that happens more and more. I think BGMEA has a fashion design institute, if I'm not mistaken, and I think that's a relatively new institute, but I think that could be a sort of hothouse for Bangladesh homegrown talent and ideas. On the architectural front, I know you didn't mention architecture, but I went to Buet the other day, and I met lots of young architects who are sort of redesigning Dhaka, and their sort of talents, I could imagine it very much appealing in the wider world. So I think Bangladesh has this very interesting, lively, youthful talent in different design areas, and which has global potential, and I hope that that will happen. I don't think we can be in the driving seat for that, but we can certainly spread the word, and the sort of Bengal tiger attempts to publicize Bangladesh's branding as a country or as an exporting country. I think that's getting momentum. I've seen it in different European countries, and we're launching an initiative in September or October called EU Bangladesh Meaning Business, which is precisely designed to promote new sectors and create links between EU business and Bangladesh business, also at quite a small level with startups and so on. And if this were there, I think it would be a lovely idea to have homegrown fashion houses and fashion design for export to Europe. I wouldn't quite agree with the term dragged our feet on Ukraine, you won't be surprised to hear. I think there were perhaps some of our member states who were more acutely aware of the potential dangers that lay ahead, but our focus had always been on really providing the quick and enormous amounts of assistance to Ukraine to build up the Ukrainian economy and build up Ukrainian wherewithal to then prepare the way for potential EU membership. So I don't think we saw in all its detail what happened coming. I think there were warning signs and rhetoric and so on, and perhaps we may not have dragged our feet, but perhaps we didn't always pick up immediately on that. Perhaps because also it's unthinkable to think that in modern day Europe, even after what happened with Ukraine with Crimea in 2014, it would be unthinkable that such a thing could happen. And let's not forget there was a constant stream of denial that there were such intentions from Russia's side. So I think now we have to put our faith in diplomacy and certainly not drag our feet on pursuing diplomatic solutions to this, because nobody wants this war to continue. And thank you for a nice question. I was very happy with your question because we are bringing on board a lot of funding for TIVET, for technical, vocational and educational training. It's going to be one of our priorities for the next 7 years. I've forgotten exactly the name of the institution, National Vocational Qualification Institute or some such. We're in the early stages of designing how we might be supportive, but that's kind of replacing our long-term funding that we've done for primary education, where we've seen what we give in primary education is important, but there's the government has a much bigger budget. So we feel that our funding in the next 7 years can make a bigger impact on technical and vocational education. And I hope that this connects well with an upcoming initiative that we're reflecting on with the government of Bangladesh, which is the talent partnership, which will pave the way for talented Bangladeshis in given sectors to go to Europe for 4 years to work in Europe and then come back to Bangladesh. And as I mentioned before, I think this initiative. So we benefit from youthful experience and drive from Bangladesh, but we don't steal your workers long term. They then get experience in Europe and come back to Bangladesh after 4 years with their portable skills to help Bangladesh continue to thrive. So I'm excited about that if we can make it work. It's at the concept phase, but I think it could be very useful to link that with what we're doing on technical and vocational training. So
Nazma Akhtar, please. Microphone.
Good morning, His Excellencies Charles Soiles, Ambassador and Head of Delegation, European Union.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Nazma Akhtar. I am ex-member of Parliament, and I am the President of Bangladesh Youth Awami League. This is a wing of Bangladesh Awami League. So I am from Awami League. একটু বাংলা হতে পারে মাঝে মাঝে, আমি আসলে ফ্লুয়েন্ট ইংলিশ বলতে ভুল হতে পারে। তো প্রথমে হিউম্যান রাইটস ভায়োলেশনের কথা, যেটা আমরা কোনো অ্যাম্বাসেডার কিংবা ফরেনার দেখলেই বলতে থাকি আমাদের দেশের হিউম্যান রাইটস ভায়োলেশন হয়েছে। তা আমাদেরকে তো বলতে হবে কখন থেকে হয়েছে। 1975 সালের পরে বিএনপি যখন ক্ষমতা এসেছিল জিয়াউর রহমান, তখন কতগুলি মার্ডার করেছিল, কু করেছিল, সেইটির ভায়োলেশন হয়েছে না 2001 থেকে 2006 পর্যন্ত বিএনপি যখন ক্ষমতায় ছিল তখন যে আওয়ামী লীগের নেতাকর্মীদের হত্যা করেছে সেটির ভায়োলেশন হয়েছে, বা যখন 2013-14 সালে আওয়ামী লীগ যখন ক্ষমতায়, বিএনপি যখন জোর করে ক্ষমতায় আসার জন্য পেট্রোল বোমা দিয়ে মানুষ হত্যা করেছিল, সেই সময় যে ঘটনাগুলি ঘটেছিল, যতগুলো মানুষকে হত্যা করা হয়েছিল, পঙ্গু করা হয়েছিল, সেটির হিউম্যান রাইটস ভায়োলেশন, এটির জবাব যদি আমরা চাই আমাদের কোনো অ্যাম্বাসেডারের কাছ থেকে, সেই কতটুকু শোভনীয় হবে সেটি আমি কোশ্চেন রেখে গেলাম আমাদের বিএনপির নেতৃবৃন্দের কাছে। I'm not going another ways. Meet the BNP. So especially I want to know. বলতে পারেন, ঝগড়া কর, পয়েন্ট ইংলিশে না বললাম, বাংলায় বললাম। Okay. I especially want to know what is your, I mean, European Union's strategy to stop the Russian and Ukraine war? This is my question. Thank you.
Mr. Dillon, please. Microphone.
Thank you, Zulu Bhai. Thank you, His Excellency Ambassador Charles Whitley. Recently we have...
Please introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah, I'm Nilo Ranjan Bishwash. I teach the Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka. I'll try not to be asking academic questions, but I know I have heard your speech, so you have also dealt with very smartly. So recently, European Union have also interested and introduced and discussed about their own Indo-Pacific policies, and this is the beauty, to my opinion, that Indo-Pacific is not a single kind of idea. There are different ideas. Our other Western partners have also introducing that, and it's giving us opportunity as a country to kind of like, you know, peak and also kind of shape our own ideas how we can be part of this bigger one. So what is the exclusive nature of the Indo-Pacific policies that European Union is interested? Is it aligning with obviously probably the other 4 partners that are considered to be the proponents of it, or what exclusive ideas that you would like to propose within the existing partnership of European Union? My second question is about the security cooperations. I teach security studies for last 5 years in the department, and also am interested in the security cooperations, particularly in violent extremism, and also countering transnational crime. So to my reading, that European Union has been promoting cooperations, which is very important, is prevention part of the violent extremism. So cooperating with the non-governmental organizations, those who are promoting awareness in the last couple of years. NGOs in Bangladesh are getting funds to do awareness programs. What is your take about cooperation with the security agencies, which is also important to counter and prevent violent extremism? Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Please, you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for giving the floor. This is Mahata from Center for Governance Studies. My question is to Your Excellency, sir, is that you know that a lot of students, especially graduates, choose to go to Europe for their higher studies, especially for the post-graduation. So after getting the admission, one of the most concerning areas for the students is the visa processing. So is there any plan, or do you have any policy or any framework for making it more flexible for the students who are planning to go to Europe? Thank you.
Ambassador, please.
Otherwise I'll forget, sorry. So Madam, thank you for the question. I didn't gather the first part of your intervention, but I understand the question was about Russia-Ukraine aggression. I mean, we're trying to work on all fronts, diplomatic fronts, of course, but also in the United Nations. We've had supported 3 resolutions which call for an end to the aggression. We have 6 rounds of sanctions that have been placed on Russian interests, which is an attempt to encourage a solution to this problem. I think we have to have faith in diplomacy, but also we're, of course, trying to support the people of Ukraine at this difficult time, including through food support, humanitarian support, and other support. So I think I would just repeat what I said at the beginning, which is we want this war to end as soon as possible and for the suffering to end. So, but thank you again for raising that point. On the Indo-Pacific, we're certainly not, as EU, aligning with others. I think others have perhaps different calibrations of their Indo-Pacific strategy, including more security elements. I think ours is pretty much a classic EU approach. There are 7 priority areas, as you may know. and this ranges across different climate change, governance, maritime engagement, people-to-people connectivity, infrastructure, and so on. So it's the sort of thing that actually we're working on already with most states in the region, including Bangladesh. I think when we looked at how we implement this in partnership with Bangladesh, at least 6 of the 7 priorities chime very well with what Bangladesh wants to do. So, and so I don't see it either as an exclusive, I forget the term used, exclusive. I see it more as complementary, because of course we have existing relations with all the states in the region, and this doesn't replace them. It's like an extra layer on top. So we have regional programs like Crimario, which is a maritime engagement program that Bangladesh is looking at the possibility of joining. And all that I think works very well, but there's a huge scope for improving collective engagement, but also bilateral engagement with Bangladesh on the Indo-Pacific, and that will be part of our political dialogue. I think I answered, you said PVE. So as you say, we are engaged to some degree on this. It used to be a much bigger priority, I think, in our old funding terms when I was here the first time. But it's important, of course. I mean, we have regular contacts with the security agencies to understand, as I said earlier when I was asked about our engagement with people in Bangladesh, we engage with everybody to understand the picture as well as we can. So you have good expertise in Bangladesh on this, and I think we as EU do not have our own security agency, as you know. Our member states have their own security agencies, so they have more intimate links between the security agencies. But I would like to look at how we boost our links with different elements of that response in Bangladesh. For example, I went to the National Defence College not so long ago, and we have a European Security and Defence College. And I would really like to see if we can build links between the European Defence College and the Bangladesh equivalent. So I think as we develop as EU our role as a security actor, it's not huge yet, and it's mainly the member states who determine this. But as we build our autonomous role as a security actor, including on peacekeeping, where obviously Bangladesh has huge expertise, we will see more of these links emerging on security and other issues like extremism and terrorism. And then Erasmus, visas. I very much understand there's a lot of challenges in this area. I mean, we as EU have our Erasmus Mundus program, which is a great program. 139 Bangladeshis this year have got places to study in Europe through our program to do MAs. But there are, of course, the national programs of member states. And I know when I discuss this with my member state ambassadors, they're working very hard to try to address the issues, because there are issues with visas. This remains, of course, in the hands of our member states. We as EU delegation do not issue visas. But I know there's quite a challenge at the moment, also for staffing reasons. But I know that every effort is being made to try to address this, and I hope that all the students who have places in Europe can take up those places in good time. I think not just the EU member states, other Western missions have the same problem as well. So, are you going to Europe or? Yeah. We can get you a visa now.
I will see more questions and expecting more questions from journalists. Dr. Azam Khan, please. Yeah.
Thanks, CGS, to arrange such a good program, meet the ambassador and Mr. Ambassador, His Excellency Charles Whitley. I have 2 questions.
Yeah, please.
I am Dr. Mohammad Azam Khan, member Central Subcommittee Bangladesh Awami League. I have 2 questions. So one question, just first, I am telling that I don't want to impress you that according to our human rights violation and genocide also, suppose as 1971, 1975, 2001 to 2006, but nowadays we are a developed country, so as a developing country, we are solving that all sort of human rights violation. But my question is that we are seeing that the double standard of various countries about the human rights violation. Suppose sometimes USA given some sanction some countries, but they don't see the Palestine crisis. They don't see in India there is a huge human rights violation against Muslims, and also in China, the Uyghur society. So their standard is double standard. So what's the stand about UE? I ask number one question. Number two question that the European Union, NATO and America all have given some sanction against Russia. But my question is that you have any function about not our country or like developing country is including this sanction. Out of if it is out of this sanction, suppose if we can take food, oil and also gas or LNG, so this developing country will not suffer. So what is your stand? Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
Professor Shardanan.
Thank you, Jillur. Good morning, and thank you, CGS and FES. And I really was impressed by your introductory lecture by His Excellency, Ambassador Charles Whitley. This is Dr. Naeem. I'm a medical professional and probably only surgeon in this house. And we are talking about, well, politics, power, money, everything, but not health. I really want to remind everybody that health is the ultimate wealth. And since I'm a doctor and I run a hospital, and you can see being here in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, the health system as a whole and the delivery system as a whole is not up to the mark, and we are not really going to that level with any developed world. I mean, in that situation, well, I was educated in Japan, and by profession, as I told you, I'm a surgeon. I do surgery still every day. The thing is that our patients are still paying more than 70%, about 75% out of pocket, which is a really difficult situation for us to deliver proper health service to the patient. So does EU has any role to play in developing a proper national health insurance system in this country, what we have been asking for a long, long time? But our politicians, our leaders, they don't look into this. They are only trying to look into, that power, politics, money, etc. But health is important. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johiruddin Shapon. Microphone here. Microphone, please.
Good morning. Thanks to Center for Governance Studies, especially Mr. Jillur and Mr. Manjur. And it's my pleasure to be introduced with His Excellency. I have two questions.
And
in fact, one is...
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Johiruddin Shapon. I am head of Media Cell, Bangladesh Nationalist Party. One is that, what is the flaws of the European Union composition that sometimes the people or some governments who took the option for autocracy, they may accuse the European Union as double standard. So what is the flaws in the European Union composition? That opportunity the people got to accuse the European Union, number one. And that is not question, it's just to interest to know the freedom of speech. Nowadays, we are practicing in also digital world, in cyber world. So as European Union is a most modern political system, how they are ensuring the digital rights of their people? If you explain in few words, we may some idea and we may learn something from you. Thanks.
Thank you. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much. First, the point on double standards. I can't speak for others, can't speak for the US or others. I would say the EU, we try to be consistent. So every single trade and cooperation agreement that we conclude with every partner around the world, and there are over, I think, over 120 bilateral agreements that we have, we include a human rights and human rights clause in trade agreements as well, which says that if either party has a human rights problem, we will discuss it together. So in that sense, we try to be consistent in our legal relations with every state. And similarly in the UN, every year we make a statement about human rights in the world, where we not only talk about the human rights across the world, but we talk about our own problems. And I sat in the UN for 4 years. I never heard any other country talk about its own problems. We actually talk about our problems. We say we have a problem in Europe with Islamophobia. We have a problem with the treatment of refugees. This is how we're trying to address it. So we try not to have double standards. I think inevitably we will be accused of double standards globally, because people always say, why aren't you doing X with Y country? But as I mentioned, we raise human rights also with the US. We don't have the death penalty in Europe. To join the European Union, you have to abolish the death penalty. Obviously, the US takes a different view, it's state by state, but we raise that with the US, and they raise issues with us as well. So I think that's part of a mature relationship, but inevitably there will be assertions of double standards. I think, what was the other? Sanctions against Russia and not suffering in developing countries. I think we are acutely aware of I've been tasked, and every country representative around the world for the EU has been tasked with monitoring very carefully the impact of sanctions, and that's why I've been calling on key ministers, including the food minister, to ask about the food supply and whether there's anything the EU can do to assist in ensuring any difficulties are overcome. Our sanctions are supposed to target Russia, and they're not supposed to unduly affect the globe. And actually, I think the main point is that, as I've said several times, is that we get this embargo lifted so that the food and fuel and the return of normal navigation can come back. And I think the prerogative for ensuring that doesn't lie with the European Union, it lies with the Russia. So I hope that we will see that happening soon. Thank you for introducing a different topic, health, Honourable Surgeon. I think we have a small role in the health sector. We used to have a much larger role, but precisely in the area that you're talking about, in the area of health insurance, we had a bit of an experiment during the COVID outbreak where we, with some of our member states, including Germany, we introduced payments to garment workers who were laid off, who were as a kind of embryonic social security system. And I believe the government of Bangladesh is working on expanding that, also with partners. I see movement also on the pension front. I understand there's new laws now for retirement pension payments. And I understand that we're working on some seed funding to look at how to support any move in Bangladesh towards a more developed health insurance system. So I think work is there in a very embryonic stage. But I'm sure you know far better than I do that in some countries it is a difficult mix in terms of insurance and payment. You know, I'm British and Dutch. In the UK, I grew up with a national health system where everything was free at the point of delivery. But of course, that costs an awful lot of money and can put a big strain on the system. In the Netherlands, what I see is you have to pay quite a lot for a very good insurance and sometimes extra money. But you can very quickly see a specialist without necessarily being referred. So I find that's also a very appealing system. It's quick. It's not free at the point of entry necessarily, but point of use. So I think getting the balance right is difficult. And for a country like Bangladesh, you know, people with your expertise will be able to navigate what the best mix is for your people and for your system so that it works for everybody. Sorry, I've lost my final point. The gentleman there, yes, I mean, on the double standards, I would just refer to the question. In Europe, we are working very hard on digital rights and trying to get the balance right. I think it's very challenging because what we see in Europe, we're different to America. We have very strong rules on hate speech in the European Union. So we do have an agreement with Facebook and Twitter and with other platforms that where there is hate speech, they will remove it when notified within a certain short frame of time. And now there's a new proposal for legislation in this area, but I have to say it's very complex. It's very complex to legislate to both protect people's well-being, but also protect their rights to freedom of expression. And every country is grappling with that, and we in Europe are no different. We have quite elaborate new legislation coming into play, but we have to see how it works in practice, because the internet is like the Wild West in some respects. You know, is not regulated in the same way as other issues are regulated. So, and it's hard to regulate the internet. But we in Europe have our experience, and also on data protection. We have very elaborate rules, the general data protection system on this, which is also copied in other countries. But certainly we're always ready to share our experience and our efforts to try to get the balance right with others.
Thank you, Charles. If you need.
Well, thank you.
Mr. Shahidul Islam Hilal. Microphone, please.
Yeah, I'm Shahidul Islam Hilal, and thank you, Ambassador, for being here. And I want to just mention
And
that we're...
your identity, please.
I beg your pardon?
Your,
I'm a businessman, and I'm engaged in industries only. So I do trade politics also. And I'm happy to say that the 5 ambassadors that are coming tomorrow, I think they are coming from European Union. Yes. And we'll be meeting them. And I'm sure we'll be discussing about business issues. And if you can just elaborate to us what is the main purpose of their visit. And we expect them, these ambassadors, visiting us as frequently as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Nilufar Chaudhary.
I don't want that to happen because it's
Please.
Thank you. Good morning, Ambassador and Head of Delegation, and Jilur Rahman and Mojur. I have simple
Please,
2 questions.
please.
I'm Nilufar Chaudhary Moni from BNP, former Member of Parliament. I have 2 simple questions. Number 1, what would you say, in your eyes, the last 2 national election of Bangladesh? And the next election, next national election. Number 2, how do you see our democracy, corruption, terrorism, murder, and disappearance? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ifat.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I am Ifat and I work for Center for Governance Studies. My question was, as we have heard a lot of questions about improvements in like the RNG sector, Bangladesh being one of the greatest exporters and everything. There has been some recent unfortunate events. For example, the fire that we saw in the depot in Chittagong, and we have seen various incidents before this. We as citizens sometimes, we kind of have lost confidence in the security measures of the infrastructures that are built in our country and things like that. So my question was, as the EU imports a lot of in RMG sector or in trade sections, is there any representative from the EU who actually comes and checks the security measures that for the security standards that should be there for the labor, for their security and in the trade relations and the infrastructure? So that was my question, that is there any representative that actually comes and checks the securities for that? So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador.
So first on the MEP visit, thank you for being available to meet them. I think it's the International Trade Committee of the European Parliament, so it's 6 European parliamentarians from lots of different parties. Green Party is one of them, a lady with a very strong background in trade unions from the Netherlands. So you'll meet them all. They're here basically, I mean, they're the trade committee, so they're very involved in the GSP regulation. As you may know, the new GSP regulation covering the whole world will come into force in 2024, and that's still under discussion with the European Parliament. So they're here to look at the whole range of our trade relations with Bangladesh, also in terms of GSP Plus and labour standards and so on. But I think they need to get a flavour also of how Bangladesh is changing. So what we've made sure of is they will visit 2 factories. One is a pharmaceutical factory and one is a yarn factory. And the yarn factory is very interesting because it makes yarn from discarded waste like pineapple skins and so on. So I think sometimes people in Europe have quite a dated view of Bangladesh. You know, their understanding of Bangladesh is 20, 30 years out of date. They don't see the way the economy has changed and grown and so on. So I think they're not here to just talk about labour issues. They really need and want to understand the bigger picture of how Bangladesh's trade relations are developing. So I look forward to ensuring they get a good cross-section of views on that. I won't go into detail on the ladies. Thank you for the questions. I think I answered those questions already so far. And on security and safety, we have quite a few developed processes in partnership with the government of Bangladesh. We have, a couple of weeks ago, we had the 3+5+1 meeting, which brings together international partners with the different ministries in Bangladesh to talk about safety and labour standards. We had a everything but arms monitoring mission in March, which came to also talk about these standards. We don't actually have inspectors that go to check on the physical safety, but I think we also should bear in mind that our brands, our European brands, are heavily engaged on the safety aspects as well. So, as you rightly say, there have been incidents, and we do discuss with the government how are those incidents being addressed and how can they be prevented in the future. And we do offer technical assistance if that's desired to support improvements in safety and security issues. So there's a very full engagement on those issues, I would say, by us and by European brands.
Thank you, Charles. Dr. Mohammed Abdul Majid, please.
Thank you, Jillur, for offering me the chance. First of all, I would like to give our most appreciative note to the Honorable Ambassador, AEC Charles Whitley, for your very good deliberation.
Sir, please introduce
and very
yourself. Introduce yourself.
This is Dr. Mohammed Abdul Majid. I am a retired government servant, a retired secretary to the government, also chairman of the National Board of Revenue. And at the present, I am also member of the advisory board to the Governance Center for Governance Studies. The question is that in these days, we are so much inclined to the political economy. Sometimes politics takes away the flavor of economics, and sometimes economics is taking away or is snatching away the essence of politics. And that's why we are always deliberating and leaving these issues in a diplomatic way. So when we are discussing this, somebody will say that what you did and what I did at that time. That is not the question and concern at this moment. I think that I was a member of the drafting committee of Paris Declaration in 2005 on aid effectiveness, harmonization, and etc. So there we said very clearly that the aid given to the countries should be seen in a very proper way. The worthiness of the aid that was given and the effectiveness of the aid that was given to the developing countries. So my question is that what is the recent or modern stand about the look into the aid effectiveness and aid worthiness that is given to the developing countries like Bangladesh. As you know that under the OECD Charter, 2 to 3% of the budget of the developed countries should be given to the developing countries for the development of their poverty reduction or human development and etc. etc. We are seeing that you are giving the aid, but our organization is a governance studies. We give more emphasis on the governance issues. So, do the EU has any future plan of seeing the governance of the aid utilization given to them or the technical or technological support given to them? For example, you are giving support to devices that can detect the terrorism and etc. etc. But you are not asking or seeing that whether these devices are being used for human violation or other human rights issues and etc. So that is why I would stress on the seeing the effectiveness or usefulness of the governance issues of the aid that is being given to the developing countries. And then the question comes that if I quote Noam Chomsky, the United States linguist as well as activist, he said that our next threat is the climatic problems or climatic devastations and etc. So what is the EU's future plan about the protect the nature, protect the climatic havocs and etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Amiaziz, frontline. Any more questions from journalists? Please.
I am a journalist, M. Aziz, His Excellency. You said earlier that EU is cooperating আপনার vocational training program. Thank you for that. But my observation is we are in automation era. That is, working area will rule by robot, IoT, data science. That means whole world needs education suiting with automation area. Do you have any plan to persuade our government or help to cooperate education suiting with automation area? Next question is, we are witnessing some diplomats are meeting political leaders and election officials also, seeking neutral and participatory election. My question is, many of Bangladeshis says it is an internal interference in Bangladesh internal affairs, but many of them also welcome it. But my question is, what is your opinion on it? Next, this move does not yield any positive outcome. What could be the next? This is my question. Thank you.
Any more hands? Yeah, please. We'll finish it.
Sorry?
We'll finish it.
Okay. Torun Begi from Global Television. My question is, from your point of view, in our country, which political party better deals with religion phobia issue, Awami League or BNP?
You really expect me to answer that?
Charles, please.
I think we'll finish there. Yeah. Thank you for the gentleman who asked the question about aid effectiveness. I think you're much more of an expert on this than I am. My background isn't in development cooperation, I have to admit. What I would say is just in terms of, I mean, we in the EU, as you'll know, we've swung between having a big emphasis on budget support, where we put a lot of money into sort of big budget pots, to project support, you know, where we control more of the process. Not just in Bangladesh, but around the world. As a basic way of delivering aid, we've sort of discussed what is the best way of delivering development assistance. And I think here in Bangladesh, we're now at the stage, certainly in the last funding period, of giving a lot of money in budget support, and we do that elsewhere around the world. But that always comes with quite stringent monitoring, you know, with public financial management monitoring. So from the point of view of the governance and the scrutiny, I think you know, wherever we give development assistance as European Union, there's quite a hefty scrutiny in place. And also in terms of, we have our fraud office, who around the world, they launch investigations if there's any question about misuse of funds. But of course, that's a slightly different question to whether the aid is being used effectively. And I think we have, again, quite rigorous procedures in place that monitor whether we think a project has had an impact. And if it doesn't have an impact, often we just stop the funding, you know, because it often goes in phases. Again, not here in Bangladesh, but in general in terms of our approach to development assistance around the world. And now with the way things are changing, with countries like Bangladesh graduating from least developed country status, there's a lot more focus on Africa in terms of our development assistance than there used to be. And I would say that we're also exploring new ways of delivering assistance per se. So one of those is blending grants and loans. Traditionally, we haven't really done this in the EU, but now the European Investment Bank has rebranded itself as the world's climate bank, or one of the world's climate banks. So they come along with quite big pots of loans on quite favourable terms that we then combine with grants in a kind of package, a blending package. And that's an interesting way. I think we have to see whether that's an effective way of delivering assistance in the future, but it's definitely happening, and it will happen here in Bangladesh with the agreement of the government. So I don't know the ins and outs of aid effectiveness, Busan and all the big meetings there have been and big agreements, so I have to confess my ignorance about the technicalities of this. So I'm sure my answer falls a bit short of your expectations, but from what I see, by and large, interesting you mentioned security facilities, because there was a scandal, I believe, in Iraq with the deployment of mirrors to check for bombs, or sniffing contraptions that sniffed for explosives that were actually fake. So there have been incidents like that in the past where the due diligence hasn't been done entirely on what we're funding. I think that's kind of inevitable when you have big programs, but certainly we try to avoid it. Then the next question, on the climate change, I mean, the EU is trying to be in the vanguard of efforts to mitigate climate change, but also adapt to the effect of climate change. We're the largest provider of climate change finance, $100 billion has been pledged. But we also have our own quite stringent attempts to reduce emissions, the Fit for 55 package and the European Green Deal. So all these policies, you know, one of the headline goals is we will reduce emissions by 55% in 2030 as compared to 1990. I hope the present war does not derail this, because of course the energy mix is now changing, and there's problems with the energy mix in Europe. We have to keep the lights on and the heating on in winter. So let's see, but the pledge is still there, and ultimately we believe the war will actually catalyse a quicker changeover to renewables in Europe. If I'm right in saying at present we only generate, in terms of consumer use, 22% of energy from renewable sources, so we have a long way to go. I think Bangladesh has pledged to generate 40% by 2041. That's a very ambitious target. We're trying to be ambitious as well in Europe, but let's see. Absolutely not going to answer that question, but thank you for putting it. And other than that, I think,
question from journalists.
sorry, I've lost my writing here. That was so automation and robots. I mean, I do hear a lot of discussion about that in Bangladesh. Also about the potential impact of automation on women's jobs in the garment sector. And of course, the key thing is to maintain employment. Nobody wants to see unemployment happening, but we're not engaged in. As far as I'm aware on this, we are engaged in, I think, artificial intelligence areas. That's something we're very interested in. And I think I met the robotics team from I've forgotten temporarily the university, but there was a very impressive robotics team from Bangladesh who went to Poland to compete in the robotics competition, and they came fourth, I understand. So I think there's a lot of exciting work going on in robotics. But of course, the economy has to decide how best to use this technology, whilst making sure people don't get supplanted by machines. But as you said, I think the key point is training people to use the technology, and we in Europe are also coming to grips with that, the fourth industrial revolution, as I think people are calling it. And our people need to be trained on this and to adapt to this coming reality. So I think we can grow with Bangladesh together in this area and learn from each other. On interference, I wouldn't answer the question, but I would again pose a question along the lines of what I said earlier. You know, does the Bangladesh ambassador in the United States only meet representatives of the Democratic Party? You know, does the Bangladesh ambassador in Brussels only meet representatives of the EPP in the European Parliament? Of course not. They meet everybody because they need to understand what's going on in the country, and that's a diplomatic norm. We have to meet everybody, otherwise we'll sit in our offices being ignorant. We might as well then just stay in Europe if we're not going to talk to people. So I think it's important to listen and understand, from as many voices as possible. Otherwise, we won't understand what's going on in very important countries like Bangladesh. So that would be my answer to that question.
Thank you, Charles. I'll take last three questions. Mr. Sadhan Kumar Das. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Shadul Kumar Das, Program Coordinator, AFES Bangladesh. My three quick questions. One question number one is that Bangladesh has like quite positive developments, and also there are a lot of changes in our businesses, quality of life, and also so we have made a lot of positive changes in our changing images, but still like Bangladesh's images is not very much positive in the European countries. Like in this regard, how European Union can assist and support and also suggest Bangladesh to change the images of Bangladesh, because this will help to grow Bangladesh and to do good business in Europe. And the question number two is also the free trade agreement, FTA, and that is also like Bangladesh government is also thinking to have FTA with European Union. But in this regard, that what do you suggest to create enabling environment in Bangladesh that will help Bangladesh to build and to draft FTA? And the third question is also like as European Union is the largest RMG destination of Bangladesh, but still like from our employer side, our factory sides, they always raise that that the profit margin is still not increasing. Like if European unions help us like in this regard, that to create some pressure on the buyers and or the retailers in Europe, so that they can increase the profit margin, that will help also the growth of our business here in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone.
Thank you.
This is the final round. So if you have any question, please raise your hand.
This is Nisha Tanjum. I'm working as an attorney in Bangladesh. So my question is very small, actually, but the thing is very big, you know. Actually, I would like to ask you, is there any bilateral measures your country and our state is planning to mitigate cyber attack? Thank you.
Thank you. Any more question? No. Yeah, please.
This is Mazhar Milon. I work for Mastranga Television. My question is, what EU think about development? Is it about financial development or the total development in terms of democracy and other things? And how we Bangladesh are running after financial development or the democratic process of development?
Any more question? Any hands? No. Ambassador Nasim Firdaus. Chance to talk to the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you, and sorry for coming back again. Just a supplementary question and comment as well. You must have noticed that we don't have in this country simultaneous interpreters at all. And European Union is a very strong hub of that. So I was wondering, when you mentioned that students from Bangladesh go to European countries, have you ever thought of creating a cache of simultaneous interpreters for major languages, European languages for Bangladesh? I know that all the Europeans have now learned English, and the English have taught the European...
To a larger or greater degree.
Well, just when I was there in Europe, in Brussels, nobody spoke English in Belgium or Germany or anywhere else, and today everybody speaks English. So, but the point is that we don't have simultaneous interpreters, and we do face, when we have international meetings here, we do have a lot of problems of that, and we sort of import interpreters from abroad for major conferences. So is that a possibility amongst all of those things that you are doing? Thank you.
Thank you. Charles, please.
So thank you very much. On the image of Bangladesh, I think it's changing quite quickly and will continue to change as the country develops and the infrastructure develops. So I see the efforts of industry here to promote a new image of Bangladesh and of the government to promote a new image of Bangladesh. BGMEA is very active and others going to European countries and seeing the necessary stakeholders like the European Parliament and so on in Brussels. So I think it will happen, and I think once we finally get rid of COVID, I know that there's a big priority being laid on tourism for Bangladesh and improving infrastructure for tourism, and I think that's very key on the image front, the people-to-people links. There's so much in terms of tourist attractions that can bring tourists to Bangladesh, and I hope we see more tourism from Europe in that respect as the infrastructure becomes more easy to navigate. On the FTA, as you'll know, the EU has launched, and India have launched negotiations now on an FTA. It's a little bit more complicated with Bangladesh because with Bangladesh already having duty-free, quota-free access to the EU market, the question is what else would an FTA bring to the relationship, and what would the terms of that FTA be? So from the EU side and the Bangladesh side, it's certainly something in our minds for the future, but it's not something that's an immediate pressing issue simply because we have very free and open trade already. Maybe investment is an area I know that the government is looking at in terms of potential agreements as well. And RMG and the profit margin, this issue is raised quite a lot. It was raised during our 3+5+1 dialogue 2 weeks ago where we had some European brands there. I think I very much understand that the profit margins are squeezed, that more is being asked of Bangladesh manufacturers in terms of compliance with environmental standards and labour standards, and that comes with a cost. So it should come with a premium. But what I'm told by buyers, and I'm not a commercial person, I'm not a businessman, what I'm told is, of course, the price still has to be competitive. Otherwise, you kill the golden goose by pricing Bangladesh out of the market. So I believe in finding a fair solution. I think it has to be a fair solution where deserved prices are paid, where the workers get deserved wages. And I think everybody's conscious of this, but also conscious of the potential for competition to arise in other low-cost centres as well. So it's a fine line, but from what I see, the profits are pretty healthy in Bangladesh. I don't see any big issues. I see healthy profits that are being reinvested in building the industry. So I may be missing something, but I don't think there's penury amongst the owners of the RMG factories yet. On cyber attacks, the question on cyber attack, sorry, from the lady. This is part of our Indo-Pacific strategy, and what we're looking at is launching, I hope quite soon with Bangladesh, a security dialogue, and that would include cyber issues, because I know Bangladesh has had some big attacks, including in the banking sector. We've had very big attacks in Europe. Some of our small member states, since the recent crisis began, have had attempts at very big attacks on government infrastructure, and we have to keep one step ahead, of course. Otherwise, we will, get cyber attacked back into the dark ages. So I think we're all, again, it's like other issues. We're all grappling with this, and I think we all have our expertise that we can share, and I hope we can get this dialogue off the ground so we can learn from each other on that. Thank you. Financial development. I mean, what I talk about and what I think we all look at is human development. So it's not just about money. Is there a qualitative impact on people's lives? And, what are the longevity statistics like? What is maternal health like? What is child mortality like? All those indicators are very important. And I think in Bangladesh, there's been a steady improvement in those indicators. I think life expectancy now is 75 years in Bangladesh, or 73. And in the end, that's a rights issue, rights also to maternal health. So all of these things are interwoven, but I think you're absolutely right to say finance isn't the bottom line. It's also quality of life issues. And what we see in Europe, perhaps now, also with an aging society in many of our countries, is that, okay, maybe financially on the paper we're doing quite well, on terms of social security we're doing quite well, but there are quality of life issues, that need addressing. So I think all of these things are in the mix, and it's important to get the balance right. So the final, on simultaneous, I think that's a wonderful idea. I think we have 23 official languages in the European Union, as you know. I think the United Nations only has 6. So we have a whole vast industry of translators and interpreters. I'm sure you went to the European Parliament during your time in Brussels and in Strasbourg as well. And the only snag is they're extremely well paid. I think they're the best paid of all our employees because they have a very stressful job going between several languages at once. But I think it's a lovely idea, and I think we should definitely explore it in the context of the talent partnership, because it's something we could certainly look at, and I think thank you for bringing that to the table.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. The European Union is a host to some of the most developed nations in the world and is regularly put on the pedestal of a bastion of science and education and a leader in the field of renewable energy. Regardless of the nature of the world to come, one can expect that EU to play a crucial geopolitical role in the shaping it. The EU is also Bangladesh's largest trade partner, with the LDC graduation upcoming and EU-Bangladesh trade prospects are growing. We are excitedly looking forward to the next chapter in our shared world history. Please join me to thank Ambassador Charles Whiteley with applause.
Thank you.